So now that everybody's settled, we're going to have a motion to go into executive session.
I would so move.
Second.
I feel like you're just messing with us.
Aye.
That is the purpose here is to talk about a piece of litigation that is
Turn off
pending.
the mics.
So, sorry.
See the first selectman here, and I know Ben couldn't make it tonight, but happy to listen to Tom Klein tell us a little more
Sure.
first.
But not a lot.
Not a lot.
Okay. Well, as I said on the request form, I had, after I submitted the budget last year around March, I had renegotiated, extended it for, the contract for Tyler Systems, which is Munis, and saved about almost $19,000. And I would like to move some of those funds, the $13,000, to my 100 lines where I can better use it to offset what I don't have. So I requested it for professional services, which I typically use for either help for web or network or cyber security.
So that's part-time help,
Yeah, all
Okay.
profession. Yes, part-time.
not
No,
consulting?
Yeah, consulting.
Yeah.
The 18,887 down here doesn't fit with the 15,538. You just mentioned another number. Can you just go through what the different numbers mean? Why have you identified 15,538 and not the 18,830?
Because that's the amount that got cut out of his
That's
budget.
the amount that got, yeah, exactly.
That was the savings?
Mhm.
That's all.
No,
Well,
that
the
was
savings
cut.
is this, but it looks like it was the cut, 15,538?
Yes.
And you're replacing
He's
it?
plugging the cut.
Mhm.
Just the cut. I mean, quite frankly, I think that technology is how we're going to move this town ahead, but I guess because of the timing of your savings, we should do it. It's just too bad that we have to do it so early in the fiscal year. It would have been better to just see how the department worked out and not have to step back and reverse something that obviously had a lot of, call it, emotion to it.
But you've saved this money. You've got a new contract at lower price, so you wouldn't have spent that money on
Right.
this contract in any case.
Correct.
Right, I understand that. I just meant in terms of people.
Other questions? Okay.
Peter, thank you so much. If you could just speak
Sure,
to,
I'd be happy to.
yeah.
So certainly seated in your positions, the budgets that you approved likely wouldn't have been the budgets you anticipated the town departments needed for your intense scrutiny. So therefore, the reductions that occurred did in fact, and because they weren't necessarily targeted to whenever they were broad, have resulted in the town administrator meeting with each of the town departments, speaking to them about their various expenditures and seeing to where they could absorb those dollar figures. And not wanting to necessarily have to overdraw their accounts. I think that would be frowned upon by this group, but also just not responsible. So it's been collaborative in terms of the departments coming forward first and saying, look, based upon what we're asked to reduce and what we forecast we can reduce or transfer to these areas. And so far, I think it's worked well, and I think once we've got the confirmation from finance as to the manner in which we can do the transfers, it eased a lot of anxiety, and I think people are approaching it very constructively. That being said, I think it speaks to the bigger question about how much we empower our managers and the budget process that we have, which has intense scrutiny, and what happens when reductions in the 11th hour occur out and without the thought of the impact. So I think that is a lesson learned, and I think it's not to be highly critical of the RTM, but I think RTM has to think about that more thoughtfully as they go forward in looking at the budget, that cuts on the 11th hour are not easily applied. They take time. So
Thank you.
Are you imagining at some point there will be a summary memorandum that describes the cuts and what impact they ended up having?
Certainly, we will do that, knowing Ben as well as I do, and getting to know him, he's compiling all of this. And I know I just have one on my desk I was reviewing, I think it involved the fire department, where they're looking to try to absorb theirs. There were some that were greater than others, but in fairness to, not so much, fair to be ton to even smaller departments, where it may have been like $6,000, it's still in the order of magnitude of real money to them. And so we'll be hearing more as months go on, but I do expect that, and I think that will be a good document for all of us to have.
Right.
Thank you for giving us an opportunity to tell you what we're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, sir?
Not from me.
No? You want to vote on this now, or you want to save them up?
Jeff,
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and vote on it?
So I move that we approve the IT1 for the Information Technology Department in the amount of $15,558.
It's a transfer.
A transfer, correct.
And as routine or non-routine?
As routine. As routine, Mary Lee? What do you think?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 400. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Next item is SE1 for Selectmen, $250,000, approval to use steep funds for neighbor to neighbor.
You're primary. So we can say,
What is-
no, go ahead. No,
There's an
You're the
opening
team.
here.
I'll-
Somebody wants to
You
sit
can
here?
be Roland.
I prefer.
Where is Roland?
Musical chairs.
Vacation.
Oh, he's on my-
Now we can ask you solid questions. You're in Roland's chair.
This is the power team.
There we go.
I'm not afraid of any of you. I got the power team.
Yeah, that's what Wayne said. Ahmed is here. She's much smarter than Wayne. We're good to go. All right?
I'll have to have a chat with him about that.
Well, I think we have that taped, so you can use it at your next review.
Okay.
Okay. Who's going to speak to this?
I'll speak, thank you.
Okay.
This application is for an approval to use a STEEP grant, that's the Small Town Economic Assistance Program with the state of Connecticut. On this application, I actually noted that it was the 2016 program, it was actually the 2015 program that we were awarded these funds in the amount of $250,000 to help support Neighbor to Neighbor's food pantry and clothing facility project. Nancy Coughlin, the executive director of Neighbor to Neighbor, is here to answer any questions, project specific that you might have. In your packet, you also had several documents regarding the assistance agreement with the state, the pass-through agreement or subrecipient agreement between the three parties, the town, the DECD, which is the administering agency, and Neighbor to Neighbor. That's the pass-through that passes the funds on to Neighbor to Neighbor. And then we have a third agreement between just the town and Neighbor to Neighbor that basically mirrors what is stated in the assistance agreement between the town and the state.
So the question arose whether this process, the steep management process, the way the state is reflecting it in these documents, is somehow different from the way it had been in prior years?
These steep grants are somewhat different than the grants we've received in the past, in that grants that have come from the steep funding to the town have come to entities like Nathaniel Witherall, the fire department, all town entities. So there's a bit of a difference here that the grant money is going to Neighbor and the YWCA. But so I think that's why the process has been a little different, to answer your question, Mr. Lash, because there are additional agreements as part of these grants that were not there in the situations where the grant monies were coming directly to a town department or town agency. So we do have an extra level of review and some additional documentation for these grants.
So when it's money being allocated to a town department, it's all inside the town. We expect the town department head to be responsible for it. But we have many of these same kinds of controls,
Yes.
but we have maybe I should call it a better understood regulation of the funds. Here, another entity is going to be spending the money, certifying that the work got done. Is this putting more work on the town to administer these two grants than we have when we're getting grants that are being spent over at the Witherell or one of the other town entities?
I think the actual requirements from the state are the same in terms of project monitoring, compliance, audits, things like that. But since the town is now involved in overseeing an outside entity's spending of that steep grant money, I think there will be additional oversight from the town to make sure that those state requirements are being complied with, not internally, but externally by other agencies. So
Right.
yes, I think there will
Okay.
be,
So then the question is, who in the town is going to do that?
yes.
So, if I may, we most recently have requested that Princess Urfe, who's the Community Development Block
Behind you.
Administrator. Yes. Princess, why don't you come on up too? You're a critical part of the team. So Princess, just over this past year, has been designated as the point person to track all of the town's external funding arrangements. And the reason for that is, in part, because of the layers of regulation that go into it, and it also parallels in many cases with the work she does with the federal program. So we have certainly encouraged people to seek grants. I can tell you that in the area of conservation, for example, Denise Savageau routinely seeks out small grants to effectuate program initiatives. So in terms of having them housed in one area and accounted for, that is Princess. Princess works closely with our office as our office is making application for these grants per the statute. I would just say, if you look at the history of the town of Greenwich with these grants, in the areas on which we applied most directly for town departments, they all fall within the area of health and safety, whether it was for dry hydrants or for the laboratory downstairs. Nathaniel Witherell, all of them have a direct health and safety benefit. And again, looking at the list, which is published, you can see where the monies go on a statewide basis. I think we have been very judicious in not seeking for what I would refer to as the nice-to-haves, but the need-to-haves, and help address what many people opine, that we send so much money to the state, we get very little in return. Well, the state, to their credit, is awarding us something. And I give credit to Representative Florin, who's been on the bond commission, for helping shepherd these through. So when it comes to these particular recipients, Neighbor to Neighbor and the YWCA, they have been very patient in working with us because they've had to get in queue. So I think it was last year, I actually was called by the governor's office and asked to prioritize the applications. And in fact, my view in that was I took who came forward first, because both provide equally important work and services. And I believe they wound up awarding to Neighbor ahead of YWCA, and I had it in reverse. But needless to say, it came through, and it supports, as you know from reading it, very necessary programs.
Your question?
Yeah, I was going to make the observation, and Peter got to this, that it's not unlike what Princess does with CDBG grantees, and perhaps a little bit like what we're going to have to do with the Bruce as well, as we monitor that money coming through for the project we've been discussing with them.
Precisely.
I guess one question I would have more for Nancy would just to give us a quick update on the process. We read about it in the paper, but I'd love to hear sort of your take on the timing and where we are now.
So the most recent update is that we appeared before P&Z. We received preliminary site plan approval in
You have the
March.
microphone.
Come to the
there,
microphone,
sorry.
maybe, if you want.
Here, we'll go this way.
Or take the microphone to you if you like.
We received preliminary site plan approval from Planning and Zoning in March, appeared before the Architectural Review Commission, the Historic District Commission, came back to Planning and Zoning. We were heard on Thursday night, September 8th. And at that hearing, the commissioners asked us, we had redesigned the building based on Historic District Commission recommendations. Planning and Zoning asked us to go back to the original design and make some adjustments to reduce the mass and come back on October 4th. So we'll come back to P&Z on October 4th. So the application is still open. If they close the application close the public hearing on the 4th, some other people will know better than I do, but I think they have something like 65 days to make the decision. Don't quote me on that. So by the time we receive approvals, assuming that will happen, we'll then submit construction documents to the town for approval, receive the building permits. The best case scenario is to break ground in early spring, and that's our hope.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jerry?
No, I mean, anybody who's been reading the newspaper probably knows, but just in case there's others who don't. I mean, the plan here is a lease for $1 for a 25-year period of the land from Christ Church for a location on which to erect the building. Neighbor to Neighbor is raising the funds. That's not coming from Christ Church. If I understood the papers correctly, there's a right of Neighbor to Neighbor to renew for a second 25-year period. This $250,000 is intended to be a part, but not all, the cost of construction. It's a modular building is what's being proposed there. I think everybody's familiar with Neighbor to Neighbor, but I'll just say the words anyway. They're presently working out of some basement space, which is charitably given to them for their use in basement of a building on the Christ Church premises. It's too small, it's damp, it has other difficulties. To try and relieve some of that, there is the purpose of moving to these new quarters. It's a very active charitable activity. I don't think anybody in the room challenges the utility of it, but it's not wholly without controversy. Where the building is to go is into the back corner, sort of what would it be, the southeast corner of the property, tucked next to, on one side, the cemetery of Christ Church, but at the back of it is the property of Putnam Hill. And there has been some fairly vocal concern from some of the residents of Putnam Hill as to the impact of this upon them. So it's not been a project wholly without controversy. Many of these public hearings have had quite a number of vocal people showing up on both sides of the issue. I don't know, was that a fair summary, just to throw those things in for anybody here who wasn't familiar with it?
That's probably the best summary I've heard yet. That was
Okay.
concise and clear and quick, yes.
Well, you're the first to accuse me of that.
That's right.
Do not encourage. Yeah, you too.
That's all I had.
Okay, so getting away from the project itself and coming back to what we're actually looking at here, which is the documentation, taking the grant, and then passing it through. The law department did ask the law committee to look at it, which they asked on sort of the night before Labor Day weekend, and to put it on our agenda. We did look at it and gave several sort of generic comments on really both, although there's a little bit of difference here, and we have not completed our review of the documentation. But I think that, sort of getting away from the fun of the project and so forth, and the importance of it, the role the town is taking here is really standing in the middle. So there's, a support basically that if for some reason, there's a change in the status of each of these entities, the town will repay the amount of the grant if they're not performing their service 10 years after the project is complete. Another difference between, again, Peter, I can't remember all these, is it's using the town insurance and the levels of insurance and no negative pledges and these kind of things, although neighbor to neighbor is a little bit different because it's the building, it's not the negative pledge one. So in the case of the Bruce Museum, coming back to that one, which we approved, I believe in June, but it could have been July, the law department did negotiate with the state, and I think, Melissa, you told us it's exactly the same overview agency that works with it, a substitute for the negative pledge. They also, I think, there were things about the insurance and so forth to be consistent with what the town requires. So I think there were some of these things. We did talk to Pete about the fact that there has to be the single audit, and McGladrey will have to go out and audit this. Is this correct, Pete? Pete's reviewed the documents. So there's a process here that will be very important for Princess, and it's going to go for a number of years. It's semi-annual, and there's a pass-through agreement. It's called a little bit different here, but it's the same kind of idea. So it's important to put this process in place, to understand what the checklist is for it, and to just review the documents, I believe, on the same standard as we have, say, the Bruce Museum, as we did recently for their transaction. And, I think we offered to meet again. I think, Amina, if everything could be done before the next meeting. I think also, I know Beth asked that in each case, the organization have their attorney review the documents and make sure they understand what some of these issues are and so forth. So, again, it's somewhat different, I think, Peter, too, from what I remember, and I don't remember all of these, but it's like, say, the lights down here at Arch Street, is that a steep grant?
No.
But anyway, I think in many cases we've had appropriations in place, say, in the budget cycle, and therefore, when we set up, before my time, the authorization and the resolutions for the steep grant, it was always a town organization. We were already appropriating the money. It was just getting the steep money in, at the time, so that people could, proceed with the project. I do think it's a little different for this process now that we're doing it for 501c3s. And so I guess my question is, and I'm not sure if it's Amina or Peter, do you plan to, again, the money's coming to us, we're appropriating, do you plan to take this to the RTM, or are you thinking that because there's a resolution in the budget book that's approved by the BET and the RTM, that you don't need to go to the RTM?
I think you answered your own question. The resolution, if it's as written, affords us the ability to do it the way we're doing it. And in all candor, these are monies coming to the town. They're not local tax monies. So the discretion has been granted by the state to award the money. I guess the question is, does Greenwich want the money or not? I think you're, so no, I don't. I don't think that's a requirement, and I don't think it was, what's gained from it? Really.
No,
Other than
it was a question.
More time taken by people to go and repeat the same things they're repeating here. I don't think I'm hearing this, but I think it would be important to have it on the record that the town, the finance board, supports the town seeking steep fundings if it's available, because again, these are competitive dollars, and I don't have to tell you, you know the situation. And so I think we're, again, trying to be very judicious and not just go out and put a laundry list of, again, nice to have things. And I think what we're going to see, and I know that there are several in conversation now, are other not-for-profits asking the town to support a request for their projects. And they have to be these are capital projects. So I, for one, believe it's a good use of the resources and it helps them.
So then would you suggest maybe, or a way to track it is say on the external entities page or separate page, start listing whether we call it the Bruce Museum bond or the steep ones, and then just how much longer we're on the hook, you know, a sort of a final date, so that we don't lose, and the total amount of the initial grant, so we don't lose track of which ones we're doing, and sort of set up a process to review it. And so that you get like a tickler.
I think we have developed the process, and again, it's administration, and so, you know, having Princess be able to track it, having law see to that they're all in the proper format and accord, and now you've introduced another important element of this in terms of any risk exposure that exists, which, having given a cursory review to these submissions, the organizations are holding the town harmless. So I don't see great risk exposure to the town in acting as the
Why wasn't it
recipient of it, in, you know, the pass-through, as you said, the pass-through.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen here is that Peter Minarski is going to have to satisfy Art Norton's audit committee that when the accounting is finalized at the end of the year, that we've properly accounted for the funds. And the advantage we have is an administrator who's familiar with having to account for all the funds in detail on the federal grants. Hopefully this won't be more painful than that is. I still can't figure out which year we're supposed to count the federal money in. But
I'll be back
but
next
you-
month for that.
That's right.
But I know you have it figured out, so I think that's okay, but in the end, it'll have to, because it flows through us, it'll have to be accounted for. And that'll have to satisfy the outside accountant and our accounting firm. So I'm sure at some point you're going to sit down and make sure you're comfortable with that.
This is a pretty simple process. One of the requirements on the Schedule A, the schedule of submission and approvals, is that the applicant has to submit a single audit report. So what you're doing tonight and Monday night is you're appropriating to the grant fund. You're setting an appropriation, gives us the authority to spend, to pay for the modular unit. That expenditure and the subsequent receipts are going to be recorded in the F fund. Auditors will come in, and to your point of the audit committee, and audit this through the Single Audit Act, along with all the other grants we get from the federal government and the state. And it'll be in the audit of the year ending 16-17, unless, in the case of going back to Nathaniel Witherall, where it straddled more than 1 year with the $500,000 you appropriated. It's a very simple in and out pass-through methodology that it's going to be audited and reported to the state, the DEC, was it Department of Economic Development.
Right. And here we've got nonprofits who have declining revenues and declining donations and getting another source of funds for a capital project that we know CDBG funds, the HUD money's drying up. And so it's terrific that we're able to shore that up with steep grants.
And increasing need should have been in that inventory.
Sure.
All right, so, Mr. Mason, so our process here is the Budget Committee, if it chooses, approves this. The Law Committee has to come to some conclusion about it, and then the full BET will take it up. So we can dispose of this, but this committee, but it's still going to have to come through the Law Committee to get to you, right?
So I would ask Ms. Tarkington, have you considered it and not voted, or have you?
We met last Wednesday because the law department had asked us to move our meeting back in order to be more ready for this evening tonight rather than tomorrow. And so at that meeting, we went through some of these items that needed to be reviewed or parallel with the Bruce. And I think that, Ms. Ahmad has been working on this, and I don't know whether, as I understood it, she, at the meeting, I think that, as I understood it, they thought it would take until next month's meeting to complete what needed to be done for the final review, and so we just sort of went with the flow, and that's kind of what I'd say, unless Amala has any update on that.
Yes, we've gone through all the issues that were raised at the Law Committee meeting and made, I think, significant progress in answering most of those issues. Some are somewhat outside of our control at this point. One of the things you had asked us was to make sure that the two agencies have their counsel contact our office so that we can have a full discussion of the obligations and everything else contained in the agreements. I understand that both agencies are going to be having their counsel contact me, so as soon as that happens, we can check off that issue. And the other thing that's still outstanding is is trying to go back to the state to see if they would agree to take out the negative pledge in the YWCA agreement. That may be an uphill battle, quite frankly, because as both Princess and Melissa can attest to, every time we contact the state, it's somewhat difficult for them to change any of their agreements.
But they've agreed to remove negative pledge language in other agreements before.
Now, yes, that's a good point.
And most
So-
recently on the
Yes,
Bruce,
so-
which we did,
so I
just
think-
in the last couple of months.
And this is a good time, I think, to address that. I did sit down with Gene McLaughlin, who handled the Bruce agreement. And the only reason the negative pledge was taken out in the Bruce assistance agreement was because the Bruce Museum comes with a deed from the Bruce family, which specifically says that that building shall be maintained as a museum in perpetuity. So the state said, okay, we can live with that, rather than requiring you to sign a negative pledge, which says you must maintain this property for this purpose for a period of 10 years. So Gene explained it to me that, first of all, it was very hard to get them to agree to it, but ultimately he was able to give them a copy of the deed on the Bruce Museum property, and the state agreed to that. So unfortunately, unless the YWCA tells me otherwise, if there's something equivalent to that, we can certainly go to the state and say, would you be willing to take this instead of a negative pledge? But I think that may be the only option, and I think ultimately we may have to live with the negative pledge and the restricted covenant. So I'm not being very optimistic there, just because of the background on the Bruce agreement.
Okay,
So-
well, maybe I can, I don't mean to cut you off, but you're the law committee. This isn't the law committee. What I'd like to do is see if this committee can dispose of this item. That puts it between you and Mr. Mason to decide when it's ready to go to the full BET, and, you'll
We can
do
vote
what
on
you
it.
think is
And
right.
and we did tell Ms. Ahmad that if we needed a interim meeting or whatever was needed, that we would accommodate that, but we have not heard anything
No, I
that's needed,
understand.
so.
That wasn't criticism you were hearing.
Right.
That was me trying to move the meeting
Right.
along.
And I think we can get together pretty quickly as soon as I'm able to speak with counsel for the two agencies and get moving on this.
Stop talking about the law committee's problems. This is the budget committee.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm teasing.
So I would move that we approve the acceptance of this steep grant and approve it as a non-routine item.
Subject to review by the law committee?
No, we're two separate committees of the BET. We'll
That's-
act, and the law committee in its own time will act on its own.
It might be in
I'm-
October that it goes to the BET, but we can still approve it.
That's between the law committee and Mr. Mason. Do I get a second?
Second.
I'm not.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I think I'll abstain, because, again, I think it should be
Abstain?
subject to the review.
Okay. 3-0-1. Okay, you might as well stay there, right?
Yes, so
You
Princess
just
will do the
Swap
switch
people.
here.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Princess.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Tessie.
you.
I'll tell Roland you did well.
The YWCA.
Okay, so the next item is SE2, approval to use steep funds, again, in this case, the Greenwich YWCA.
Yes. Thank you. And before we start, I just want to introduce the YWCA staff that's here with us. We have Monica Borgi, Chief Advancement Officer. We have Mita Spillo. She's the acting president and CEO. We have Peter Lasalandra, the Chief Financial Officer, CFO of the YWCA, and Jim Luxkey, Facilities Director. Sorry. So we have a full management
Welcome.
presence here. And I thank them for attending the meeting. We provided you with all the information, the documents, the agreements that is pertaining to the STEEP grant for the YWCA. So we're really here to address any questions that the committee will have on those items, in addition to the ones that you've already asked of the neighbor to neighbor.
Right.
I would just have the same quick question, if you could update us on your timeline and your progress. It hasn't been covered in the paper the way the other project has.
Sure. So our project, we're fixing 3 of the 10. We have 10 roof sections. We're replacing 3 for leaking. We cannot start until we receive the funding. Once we receive the funding, our entire timeline is 3 weeks. We are also, part of the STEEP application was to renovate one of the children's bathrooms for domestic abuse services so clients can bring their children, and to also work on lighting, security lighting. Believe it or not, we see an influx of services as it gets darker earlier in the evening. That is the time of year where we see an influx of services. Clients actually, during the summer, we don't see, they're with their families. When normal schedules resume and kids are in school, and through the winter months when everyone's busy is where women and victims can get away, and that is where we actually see our influx of services, and it gets dark at 5:30. So we're really trying to create a safer environment. But as soon as the BET, if the full committee approves, as soon as we sign the contract, within 3 weeks, we can have the project complete.
So we have a little time pressure here because you want to get the roof done.
Yes.
And what's your contractor telling you about that?
We have to bid it, so we can't bid until once the contracts are signed, our full bid package will go to the state. The state needs to approve the bid package. We will bid it out. It's a 3-week turnaround time on the bidding project, per our timeline that we've worked on. And then once bids have been approved, 3-week turnaround on the project.
Okay. So the unknown really in here is how long it's going to wait at the state once you send them the material.
I think we're ready. Once approved,
Yes.
the state's ready for us through Princess.
We've been in contact with the state only because of the nature of the project. We wanted to start the project, complete the project by last summer or this past summer. So we've provided them with a draft of the bidding materials. That way, when we're anticipating that when we get the approval from the BET and sign the contract, we can go ahead and get a final approval from them and get the project started.
Questions from the committee?
No, I'll make a motion. I'm happy to move that we approve this grant as a non-routine item.
Sorry.
As a non-routine item, and this, of course, acknowledging that the law committee has to finish the work that they're doing.
And I would second that.
Okay. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And I'd just like to comment that
Sure.
because she added the law committee in there, then I'm supporting it.
Thank you.
That is 4-0.
4-0.
That's 4-0 on this one.
4-0-0 minus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
I apologize.
Thank you.
We knew you.
Appreciate that. There's only one other of us.
Next item is HD1 Health Department, $45,377. Approval to use a PHEP grant. Is it PHEP? Is that right?
Good evening.
Public health.
How are you?
Emergency preparedness.
Okay. We've got 2 grants before you. First grant is Public Health Emergency Preparedness Grant. The whole grant is $45,377. It is the second amount that we get in a 2-year contract. This is the last year. We don't know what it holds for us next year, but I can tell you it'll probably be a lot less. So this money will support the entire funding of the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for the town. Right now, she's working on a Zika virus response plan, and we're moving forward, being prepared for anything that may come our way due to that public health emergency that's happening right here in the United States, down in Miami, Florida. So really, it covers not only her salary, but her benefits.
Just a quick question on both, Caroline. So these funds cover part of a 1.0 FTE that exists already with benefits, or this is a part-time?
This is part-time, permanent part-time.
Permanent part-time?
Yes.
Got it. And
By
what's the
state
plan
grant.
after the grant goes away? This first one is 2 years?
Well, it's a 2-year grant. This amount is for the second year of the grant, and then next year.
You can apply again.
Well, who knows?
So what happens to the position?
With a grant, you just hold your fingers and hope for the best.
So what happens to the position if the who knows doesn't work out?
I have a lot of confidence in Caroline. We see a lot of.
We don't talk about that.
Very successful about getting grants.
There's too many public health issues that
Well,
that
maybe
are facing us. We hope
Caroline,
that we get money.
Maybe the question is, how does the forecast look for this type of funding from that program?
I think that the funding is good. We did get cut 17.5%. I think it was a political issue, a reason why we got cut in this neck of the woods as opposed to the upper portion of the state. But I think that issues like Zika virus and other public health emergencies continue to evolve, and that the president is, whatever president is who takes over or who's currently in charge, will continue to put monies in those areas that need funding in order to prepare for these issues. And certainly the Ebola money, which we all got, also aided in that issue for Ebola, and now some of the leftover Ebola money has now been redirected into the states, and it will filter down into the local health department as well. So I feel confident that that will be funded. Whether or not will be adequately funded is what I have an issue with.
Okay, thank you.
Which comes to the next grant.
Okay, well, hold that a second. Other questions on this one?
Would you like me to move and
Sure.
progress it? So, we've been sort of doing this. So I'll move that we approve this application, HD1, for the Health Department, approval to use a PHEP grant for $45,377. Routine item.
I'd second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 400 routine. All right, the next item is $65,576, approval to use a Public Act grant.
This grant is also routine for local health departments with full-time directors of health, part-time directors of health in the state. Unfortunately, those towns and jurisdictions don't get any Public Act funding. We were cut 6.2% for this fiscal year, which leaves us with the amount of $65,576.39. In the listing of the services that we will provide are personal services. Part-time environmental aid is a temporary position that we use in the summertime to support taking beach samples and public health pool samples and analyze that for public health safety. That's been in our grant for quite some time now, and it's routine. Part-time public health educator promotion specialist. We have also put that through this grant pretty effectively, and that person helps us with doing some promotion of public health education on a limited basis, but nevertheless, we still get some information out to the public. The third item is the part-time emergency preparedness coordinator, again, to make up the deficit of what we got cut. And hopefully, we will continue to, support this as well to make up the deficit so we can at least have someone all year. This past year, we did run out of money, so we were without a public health emergency coordinator for 2 months. Luckily, nothing really came about, because she's the one that's ahead of, or goes into the EOC and organizes any kind of program of sheltering and so on and so forth. So we kind of went by on that. And then the last one is a part-time lab assistant. We feel that we need some assistant down there. We only have 3 full-time people, and this would enable us to put forward some of our new programs, which is radon in water, which seems to be one of the contaminants. I don't want to say the word soil. It's kind of a little sensitive about there, but nevertheless, we do have areas and pockets in Greenwich that have high radon levels in air, and so it's not unusual that we will see, as we start to test for radon in water, we will also see that as well. So this will give us an opportunity to bring somebody on board to help us with launching that program, and we have received funding through this, I believe this grant, in order to buy the equipment to start that program and the maintenance. So trying to utilize everything we get to the advantage of the community.
The only question I had is that the 22,000 and change for the emergency preparedness coordinator, that's the same person as the 45,000 and
Yes.
change. So between the two, it's a permanent part-time position, in which between these two grants,
Yeah.
you're getting funding of about
Yeah.
66 or 67,000.
We probably won't have to use all of it, because you understand that the permanent part-time only allows you to go up to 25 hours a week. There's a stipulation from the Affordable Care Act. You can't go over that. You can't actually exceed 30, otherwise you owe, full-time services or benefits, health benefits. And so all our permanent part-timers throughout the town have restrictive hours to 25 hours. So wherever the money takes you with that during the year, you either make it to the end of the year or you don't make it to the end of the year. So this particular individual on the 45,377 on this year's grant worked about 23 to 25 hours a week, and then she ran out of money, and I had no money, to support that, so she was laid off.
Carolyn, it appeared to me from the prior one, the application we've already approved, that you seem to submit something called a personal service agreement. It's a state form. And on it, it says that you certify in an attached page what are the services that we're going to be providing, that the contractor undertakes to provide. In that, are you stipulating that one of the services we're providing is a permanent part-time emergency services coordinator? Because do we have a problem then where we've certified to the state that that's a service that we're providing, but then in the end, we receive funding and we're not able to use it all for that purpose? I don't actually have the page. It refers us to a page 1B. We don't actually have that page 1B. So I don't really know exactly what we certified in your
yes.
description to us.
Right. It just goes on to say, I don't have the full contract in front of me, but it just goes on to say, I don't know what it goes on to say. You know what it goes on to say?
My only concern here is it a worry for us that we're, let me back up. Are we certifying to the state that we're going to spend $67,000 on permanent
No.
part-time emergency coordinators?
No.
And in fact, we may not?
No, the 45,000.
Yes.
Well, plus the 22.
No,
The 40
but that's two separate grants, two different requirements and criteria. This is only to, the 20,000 listed in the Public Act was to allow us to continue to have her on board.
Right, that's
All right,
right.
the 45,000 is
Exclusive.
Is exclusively for her use.
That's right.
Okay, so that's what we're, if you will, attesting to the state, that all of it
The
is going to be-
45,000.
Absolutely.
And
To
what
her,
about this, what
right.
about this 22,000?
The 22,000 is just, it's a listing, and we're not certifying that we have to use that specifically.
Amount.
So if we don't need all those funds for that purpose,
I can use it for the other people
We have the authority
listed.
to redirect it to something
Yes,
else
we
that
do.
you need.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. And what we would do in that particular case, we would put through a budget adjustment.
We have to do
if
a
there's
budget
enough time,
adjustment.
To say we are going to reallocate a portion of that salary to
Yeah.
something else. And it doesn't have to be a salary, it could be a service, It
Right.
could be equipment, it could be
Right.
supplies.
They're very stringent on making sure that we do budget adjustments and they do auditing and, you know, then it's like any other organization that gives you money. They want to make sure that you're doing it correctly.
I hope I clarified that.
You did, I'm satisfied, thank you.
And this is not different from what you've done in prior years.
Correct.
All right, may I have a motion?
So I move HD2 for the Health Department, $65,576, approval to use.
And 39 cents.
Well, I know, but, well, if we want to say the 39 cents.
I think we should.
Pete, do we have to say 39 cents? We don't have it on our agenda.
We're good.
Pete,
They need,
What do they have?
Oh, the 39
do you want
cents.
us to say the 39 cents?
you could round up if you want. I
Okay,
don't-
Or down.
Just do the 777.
This.
Okay,
It's
$65,577.
Yeah.
May I have a second?
Is this the routine or non-routine?
This is routine.
Routine, I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0-0.
Thank
While I
you.
have While I have you sitting there, you're getting ready to launch your annual flu vaccination program?
Oh, yes.
I saw a sign out
My
front.
flu program starting at least 2 weeks early this year. We had gotten the flu vaccine, surprised me. So we're moving forward and, you know, we're just encouraging people to get their flu shot because we have no idea whether or not this is going to be a mild season or a severe season. And, you know, with all the changes in viruses and, you know, it's just get the flu shot and wash your hands.
What's the cost to the consumer?
I'm sorry?
What's the cost to the recipient?
35.
$35.
Thank you.
That's for
It's the best
regular
deal.
and high dose as well.
Say again?
That's for the regular, what they call quadrivalent, that's $35. And also the high dose for those
60
folks who are,
65 and older.
yes.
So
That's your job,
does it
sure
make
is.
any, does it make any difference if you get it earlier? Is it more or less effective, or just doesn't make any difference at all?
No, because in the fall, you know, they say get it in the fall, but last year, surprisingly enough, the flu season went a little longer than expected. It can go into May, and it did. Now, usually you'll see a peak in January and February, and it kind of fizzles out in the early spring, but this one, we were getting reported flu cases in the month of May, almost to the end. So that was very surprising.
Caroline,
You don't know what's going to be in store for you.
Now, Caroline quickly figured out when I was first selectman that I was evading my flu vaccination and
It came down.
came down to the office. Fortunately, they give those in the arm.
That's right.
Yes. Absolutely.
Nice to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Where's with the budget, we do it somewhere else, is that it?
I didn't hear that.
Did you hear that? I was making an affirmative statement. All right, we have no old business, which brings us to new business, which is the first discussion of the draft of the budget guidelines for fiscal 2018. So, let me lay a little background here, and then we can discuss this. The plan is to discuss the draft guidelines tonight, and then at next month's meeting at the Budget Committee. And Mr. Mason will decide whether he wants to discuss this at all at this month's BET meeting, though I'll probably try to summarize what we discussed this evening for the benefit of that meeting. And then hopefully we'll have something that we can come to agreement on at our next meeting and then submit to the full BET for its approval. And that way, both the schools and the departments will be in a position to at least move ahead with their budgets, knowing what the BET is thinking, whether they agree with all of it or not. What has happened so far is we went back and looked at 5 or 6, 7 years of prior guidelines and looked at the trends and the way they were structured and the way the language had been written, and I plagiarized some of that, and Ms. Kiernan and I then went back and forth editing drafts until we arrived at the version you have now. There's been one caucus of the Democrats and one caucus of the Republicans in the full BET group, and so all 12 members have had some opportunity to talk about it. I think there are, from the feedback I have from those conversations, I think, there'll be some more drafting to do and some more clarifying and perhaps adding some things that aren't here now and perhaps deleting some things that are. If I could get my wish, what I would avoid tonight is trying to spend too much time editing the language, because there's going to be a rewrite of this between now and the meeting we have a month from now. And so we could find ourselves having sat here to perfect the language about something that we then largely undo. But if there's language here that, in a substantive way, isn't what the committee thinks we should be sending on to the full BET, obviously we should talk about that tonight. I think that in the drafting of this and in the back and forth, mostly sadly when Mary Lee was on vacation, sorry about that. I think part of what we're trying to do is something that was alluded to in the conversation earlier this evening. We're trying to get to the point where the budget guideline reveals what kinds of things are going to be cut if the budget gets cut in a more specific way, which was a point you made, I think, at our last meeting, that one of the difficulties that cropped up from the RTM's actions at its May meeting was we didn't really know what was going to be cut. We didn't know what it was going to impact. And so part of what this draft does is it asks departments to be specific about what things are likely to be impacted if there are, I'll call them meaningful cuts in the budget. The document is designed in part to mimic what we've seen in prior guidelines. So the format of so-called Exhibit 1, which is the big spreadsheet that lays out the prior year's budget and the amount that would be implied for the fiscal 18 budget if we adopted exactly the kind of guideline we had last year, which was sort of a 2.5% increase in the salaries and a 2% increase in other operating costs, and therefore, in total operating costs, so a little bit lower increase in other operating costs. That wasn't meant to be a prescription. It was meant to give us a starting point that's the starting point we had last year, so we could see what it looks like, amended by things that we now know. For example, we now know what the fiscal 17 budget is, and also amended by things that we either know or we think are likely. So an example would be that we think there's as reflected in this document, a chance that the teacher's contract will adopt the state health plan. And if they adopt the state health plan and no one else adopts the state health plan, or at least doesn't adopt it in time for the fiscal 18 budget, then it reflects the net savings of those two actions. And most of you know, but I'll say it for the record, the effect is that our health care provider will obviously take out of the costs the savings from the teachers moving out of the program, but then they look at the rating for the people who are left and actually raise the charges for those people. And so the net effect in this Exhibit 1 that's attached is only about $1 million of savings. I'm not sniffing at $1 million, but it's not multiple millions of dollars. so it's not as big a factor as it might otherwise be. So those are the kinds of things that are reflected in here. They're not, certainly at this stage, meant to be prescriptive, but rather to give us a place to start. We've in prior meetings had various versions of Exhibit 1 with different starting increases and assumptions about labor costs and other costs. But the one that's attached here now mimics the one that we had a year ago. That may not be what we end up deciding we want to do, but that way we have a place that we can start from that we're all familiar with. So, again, the schedule here, the intent here is not to make a decision about something tonight, but rather discuss this. It gives us a place to start. Planning to discuss it again next month, and hopefully then let the full BET act on it a week or two later, whatever the schedule called. It's just a week later, I think, in that case. So, with that as background, Mary Lee, anything you want to say?
Sure, I'll make a couple of observations. First, that, I think we improved on language describing what these guidelines are and what the various numbers contained both in the language and in the exhibit represent. I think there may have been some misunderstanding of that out in the community last year. And so it really is important, to your point, Jim, that we clarify that. This is early. There's a lot we don't know yet. We don't have an audit from 16. We don't have really anything from 17 yet. We have the first selectman who's going to go through his process, and the superintendent. We go through our process. But there's a lot of variables still in play. We don't have evaluation on the retirement system. So this is preliminary and meant to blue sky budget challenges and provide some guidance to department heads early in the game. A couple of positive things I would point out. I think the ask of departments to do some further analysis on opportunities, shall we call it, in their operating budget for savings is important. Another positive ask is to refine and improve the 15-year capital plan, which is set forth in pretty good detail in this draft. Two positive additions, I think, versus prior years. And I think it's really a great first step, and I can speak for our caucus, I think, on this, toward us coming together around the guidelines, which we haven't done in 4 years. So I'm feeling positive about it at this point. Obviously, there are a variety of very thoughtful comments out there, and maybe some differences on language and certain of the concepts, but I think we've come a long way, even in this first draft.
So I thought what we'd do is let the committee members say anything they want to say, and then if some of the other BET members want to speak on the subject, I'm happy to hear those comments now.
Whichever, with ladies first.
We'll work our way down the line here.
Okay, but,
I don't talk too much at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So,
that's an hour and 15 minutes, okay.
I've seen you talk.
Oh, okay.
All of you, I'm not singling anyone out.
You set yourself up for
That
that.
was low-hanging fruit there.
So, there's good news and bad news here. I think that that Jim and Mary Lee have made great progress here, and they started the framework of some very good budget guidelines. Jim and I did get together in the morning, I think, of August 12th, and then I left on vacation, so I was gone the whole time. They were working on it, and additional good news.
Without Wi-Fi.
And no, it wasn't the Wi-Fi. I had plenty of Wi-Fi, but my town email went down 100% until September 1. So it just made a superb vacation. So I was disconnected from some of this, but I did, as I think Jim knows, because I sent him comments on Friday. I went through this not to wordsmith it, but to really kind of, get some of my ideas and thoughts out there in terms of what I'd like to see in terms of this framework and what we've accomplished and how we can build on what we've accomplished. And also the very talented management team that continues to be put in place. I mean, it's amazing as the town has hired new managers, the quality is great. Many of them are coming from the private sector, but there's clearly, a great choice out there. So I'm happy to share my comments, with each of you. I've already shared them with Jim. I will just tell Jim that in order to differentiate from his, I've actually updated the date to September 9th. Otherwise, they're identical. And, I would like to see, first, just a laying out of information on sort of saying, gee, what has the CPI been for our area, the current past, fiscal year? What have the wages been, again, through the BLS numbers, publicly available numbers? What does it look like over the last 5 years? And sort of attach a little bit of numbers to this. Using that base, I would prefer to see a lower increase in wages to the 2% level. And I have worked with Roland and talked to Roland about this. And so, I can again share the spreadsheet work papers that Roland put together. And, he thinks this is feasible. Does it mean fewer employees? Yes. In Roland's numbers, what is this? And it's 9, which isn't very dramatic because you've got basically 9 months a year to put something in place, and it's less than a third of 1% when you look at the entire, and with, just our ongoing review of departments and so forth. I think that that's, feasible. I put more detail in here, particularly Mary Lee and Jeff, who haven't necessarily seen this yet, about the kind of detailed schedule of all their employee costs, including wages, health benefits, pension, FICA, and other costs for every department.
What page do you want, Leslie?
Well, you have a copy of mine?
No. What page
I'll
is
give
it?
it to you afterwards. But
Okay.
I'm under your estimated fiscal year budget assumptions. I just added another assumption. So just more, and that just acknowledgement that they've received it, and to the budget director, their receipt and consideration. Not to any of us necessarily, but so often over the last couple of years, I hear, board members or department heads say, my department makes a profit. No department is really making a profit in all these departments. It's just that we in finance are managing their costs in fixed costs. So just, an acknowledgement, again, not necessarily to us. I think just a limitation on operating initiatives. Again, I'd like to come back because while I agree it's a good idea to have departments, identify things where they can save money, what I find over the last few years is all of the burden then gets onto us. I'd like to see an opportunity where they've managed this level, and if there's any money to put back into the budget, they put their opportunities of the additional things that they'd like to have there, rather than putting the responsibility on us to reduce this. Working on this, again, having Roland do the numbers, and I asked him to keep health benefits the same, to keep pension the same. There's like 1 or 2 anomalies in there for Roland's on vacation. But we know what the issues are. And, but basically he said, in order to come to a mill rate increase of 2%, it would take funding of about $1,650,000 based on these various and sundry scenarios. Lower capital, again, in our July meeting, I talked about the fact that we have money appropriated and unspent that's about $189 million. So much more focus on a maintenance budget. Last year's maintenance budget was $25 million. It had a lot in it too. I've gone through every capital item with Roland at some point during the summer, so, we've talked about that. Then in addition to that, I put another, it's a separate line, you'll see it there, never seen it before, another $5 million. And that might be for remediation projects that, the town might want to begin to address, other kinds of things to get, capital projects moving. So it increases it by 5 million, but that would be sort of a separate area. So these are, I think, more or less the things that I've been, I added another sort of sentence in my, I don't want to call it wordsmithing, but just a comment that in the past 5 years, the budget has reflected the recessionary and slower 1.5% annual growth of this period, and the mill rate increase has been reduced to 2.75% annually, except in fiscal 17 at 2.81%. Again, I'll give all this to you, Mary Lee, this, just kind of to put it into perspective in terms of what we have been able to accomplish, all of us working together. I think in another sentence, again, I'm not wordsmithing, but something like the BET wants the leadership, including volunteers of the town departments and BOE, to take proactive control of cost reduction. Nevertheless, the BET expects budget growth to exceed the inflation rate. Or we could even say double the inflation rate, which would be, still within the confines of this. I think that summarizes everything that I think you and I have talked about or have sent to you before, more or less, unless you think there's something there that I missed.
Well, no, and we have, or they don't have the picture.
No, but I'm going to give it to them right now.
Jeffrey?
I join with my colleagues in complimenting the drafting that was here. This is an example that, this is one of those things where I think less is more, and I'm grateful for a shorter, more concise, more plain-speaking draft, which I think this has accomplished. I also think it's articulately expressed, so I compliment the draftsmen, plural, who have worked on this. I don't mean to be taking any way away from Jim's work, but I want to be sure that I'm acknowledging also Mary Lee's.
Absolutely.
There will be, in the appropriate time, concern that I'm going to express in 3 areas. The first is as to the percentage figures themselves. On the 2.5% figure that is used as an estimation of the cost increase on the salary 100s lines, every indication seems to be that that's a reasonable and accurate prediction. The 2%, just exactly as the chair has said in his comments, is a target figure really kind of picked up from the last 2 years. And then the 1%, when you actually look at Exhibit 1, the figures aren't precisely 1%, but the figures each of them are in the neighborhood of 1%. Those are sort of, I don't mean to be denigrating about it, but those are sort of plug numbers that are necessary to get to the 2% at the bottom. Yep. So what happens there is we set a target. I think a target is a better word than cap, and the flavor of the wording of the guidelines doesn't have a connotation of cap, so I'm going to use the word target. Sets a target. Let's set a target here of, okay, we acknowledge that salaries are going to go up by 2.5%, and let's set a target of trying to reach 2% in the overall. I too had some dialogue with Roland. I think Roland was pretty busy over the summer as I listened to everybody. It seems that everybody I could think of has been talking to Roland. No wonder he's on vacation, the poor bastard. But anyway, I asked him the direct question, Roland, given the cuts that were taken by the BET, net it was roughly $610,000 of the cuts, not by the BET, by the RTM, I meant to say. So since we're talking budget comparison, budget to budget, and since the budget that we're taking for the year that's the base is the one as culled by the RTM, if I were shooting for level services, not looking at this point to be cutting out programs that we think are inefficient, not laying off people that we think are unnecessary, if I were taking my present workforce and not eliminating any positions, and if I were taking the current programs and moving them forward, the so-called level services budget, what do those numbers come out at? And his guesstimation on the non-salary operating, that is to say the remaining 100s and then the 200s through the 800s, he thought that number was likely not 1%, but more like about 2%. And then I asked him to run the math for me, then what's my bottom line on total operating, the one that's equivalent to the 2% figure? And interestingly enough, it wasn't dramatically different than the 2% figure. He came up with 2.3%. It's the very same 1/3 of 1% I just heard Mrs. Tarkington refer to. So, even the so-called level services budget with existing workforce isn't dramatically different. So there's not much basis for me to have hysterical objection to the 2% target. Nevertheless, if I were pushing forward the guidelines, I might have approached it slightly differently. There's articulate text in the language that's being proposed in these guidelines right now that foreshadows what we're going to be doing in January and February, and that is wording, I think, it came from Mr. Lash, that indicates that we want to have a lively conversation with you on where we can reduce force and not damage the existing services, and where are there services that frankly are inefficient or unnecessary. In other words, where can cost savings be made? My own view might have been that I might have made the change that I would have prognosticated in Exhibit 1 that looks a little more like Roland's level services budget as he assisted me with, and lean more on the articulation of Mr. Lash saying that nevertheless, we're going to make cuts from that Exhibit 1 to try and find the places where we can do things more efficiently by reducing force for the same services or by reducing certain services that we think are unnecessary. Item number 2 on the changes that I would have made is simply a textual item. The draft that's proposed, I believe again it was the drafting originally of Mr. Lash, that he, at the bottom of the second page and the top of the third page on the draft I was working with, I'm not sure the pagination is quite the same, the draft steps forward and says, there's been a lot of articulation, a lot of conversation at the RTM and in other places about cost reductions, and one should understand the impact of these reductions, the extent to which to achieve small savings, you're laying off a large number of people. And in fact, the particular examples that the draft put forward is, if you wanted to reduce by $8.6 million, which would be the sum in Exhibit 1 to get down to a mill rate increase of 2.75% of increase in mill rate, now you would be laying off approximately 50 people. It then talks about a second example and says if you wanted to achieve a 0% increase in mill rate, you'd have to cut by about 20 million people. That exhibit doesn't talk about the number of, $20 million. It doesn't talk about the number of people, but to do the same math, I came up at about 118 people to be cut to achieve that. I might have preferred, although I understand perfectly the point that's being made, and the point is very clearly expressed, I had the concern that this would be seized upon by our colleagues at the Budget Overview Committee as being, well, let's make cuts in that amount. They are, after all, cuts which are proposed in the BET's own guidelines. And saying those words would be, in fact, a misstatement. They're not being proposed by us, but they are being cited by us. And I thought, I'm not sure why I'd like to be inviting the the Budget Overview Committee to be making those cuts and to be pointing to us as the authors of it. I would rather just have deleted that passage and not make that invitation. The last piece relates to the capital component. When the CIP process was begun, and remarkably enough, of course, the CIP process, as we know it today, was begun by our very own chair of the Budget Committee. And at the time that it was done, the protocol that was being used was a protocol of scoring these, assigning scores to these capital projects and ranking them in a specific order of priority. And it had the advantage that it had a frankness with our public, that when we listed out, I'm going to pick arbitrary numbers, when we listed out $150 million worth of capital projects that the CIP thinks are recommendable, anybody looking at the budget knows, but of course nobody, no town, this town certainly isn't going to approve $150 million worth of projects. And if the more reasonable number might have been $50 million worth of projects, to have a specific ranking then would have had the candor to our public that the first 50 million or so are the ones that maybe the CIP process at least thinks are actually the items that might be worthy and appropriate for approval in an upcoming year. And I liked that candor, and when I sat on the BET and was enjoying the benefit of that process, I found it useful to me. And I find it that it hampers me to now get a CIP process in which it has a grandiose list of projects, far more than we can approve in a given year, probably more than we can approve in 3, 4, or 5 years without the ranking. I feel that there's a piece of advice I would like to have gotten from the CIP process that I'm not getting. And so my third and last proposal would be to take language that the chair has already put into this draft, recommending that be some process of prioritization, and to try and word it a little more strongly. We can't force the first selectman and the CIP process to do anything they don't want to do. They will do what they want to do, but we should be at least expressing our very strong preference that we benefited when you gave a specific ranking and priority to these, and we wish you would go back to it. It would help us if you would do so. So without my being so detailed as to start to read text to you, that's what I think the chair doesn't want me to do when you say you don't want me wordsmithing here. Those are the 3 areas of changes that I will be trying to come back to this committee with over the upcoming days. And I thank you for the opportunity, and I didn't take an hour and 15 minutes to say it.
No, you were expedient.
Okay, well, I don't know about that, but I...
How do you breathe?
Okay.
For years of practice.
Yeah. I'm a lawyer, you know.
It's like it's like performing at the Met. You know? I couldn't do that.
No, if you take a breath, the other lawyer starts to speak, so you better not.
Or the judge.
So maybe I could invite other BET members to make any observations you want to make?
Two questions.
I'm not sure I want to allow questions. Well, okay.
So, first question of Leslie. Leslie, are you actually proposing a lower number than the 2.5% for the salary component?
Yes, I was proposing a 2.0, and again, Roland felt that that could be accomplished. Again, you know, I do think that we have some legacy positions. I threw in some ideas, different kind of things that maybe could be considered. I think with the use of technology, I mean, we've seen the use of technology, how that's changed, say, the assessor's office or whatever. And
Dare I suggest tax collector's office?
well, you know, I lumped quite a few departments in there because I think we don't want to be too direct, but I do think that there are opportunities. The way I threw out some ideas. As an example, you know, we have many different places in town hall that collects residents' money, whether it's for beach cards or for parking tickets or whether it's tax collection. Maybe we need one window where all payments could be made, which would come back to your point. And then also along the same idea, maybe we only should have, you know, one credit card processor for all these different departments and many others, and would that be more efficient and less costly? So trying to come up with things that, you know, if you over, you know, just through transition and whatever, over the next, say, 9 months or year, where you would need nine people fewer when you...
Your idea is to, I hope, I guess I'm
Right.
intuiting to provide the same level of service to the town, but more efficiently.
Absolutely.
So, but is the best way to get to that by saying we will target something less than 2.5% for the salary?
Well,
Or is there some other?
You know, I don't know, but, you know, in the past, we've always sort of taken the leadership, and we're the ones who make the cuts, and then we're the bad people. And so, you know, why not, and I in mind, and, you know, I don't want to be the wordsmithing person, why not say, gee, this is our goal, but tell us what other kind of projects would make your department more efficient or make the town more user-friendly or whatever it happens to be. And sort of then let our, you know, Board of Education chairman and our first selectman and the others, and us too, decide then what makes sense to, you know, add some more to some of these departments where we can provide better service or do it more efficiently. So, you know, just a different way of looking at it. Again, still at rates that are double the inflation rate for this, you know, the wage rate for this part of our little tri-state area is only 0.8%.
We know we're locked in though.
Well, you know, but
Can I move on to
anyway.
the
Second question.
Let's hear the second
Can I move on
question.
to a second question for Jim? Jim, when Jeff said that he liked the idea of getting back to the rankings in the CIP process, philosophically, do you like the idea of this board deciding among projects in that way as part of the capital project process?
This board as opposed to the CIP process. Well, the CIP process was designed originally mostly by Ed Gomo, who was at the time, the Peter Minarski. Right? He had Peter's job. And so Ed had done this in other places. And what he saw, what we sort of worked on over time, was a CIP committee that consisted of somebody to represent the superintendent of schools, which is the biggest consumer of capital dollars typically, and then somebody from each of the other departments that were primary consumers of capital dollars, so Public Works and Parks and Rec and so on, and not other people. So that the people who were scoring the projects were people who had firsthand knowledge of many of the projects and a ready sort of understanding of complexity of projects, and even though the project might be somebody else's project, they weren't mystified about how to score it. And the scoring system started with life safety. That got you more points than nice to have down at the bottom. And in between there were sort of, as I recall, 13 ranking points. That system still exists, and sorry?
It does exist.
Yeah, and
The criteria,
Yeah.
to rank them still exist.
right, and what I've drafted into this, but maybe not artfully enough, is saying to the town management, we really want you to go back and do it that way, so that we get a forced order list out of you. You can show us the scores, that's fine, but what used to happen, I'm not saying this was good or bad, it's just what used to happen, was we would go down through the list until we ran out of money. We'd draw a line, and that was all the projects that got approved that year. And in the beginning, the total amount of money that was available was far less than it is today, because for 15 years we've been adding sort of $3 million a year. It used to be 1% increase in the mill rate, which back in those days was about 2.6, 2.7 million. Today it's, if we added 1%, it would be three something.
3.5.
Just about 3.
No, it's got to be more than 3.5, something like that. But we're adding 3 these days. So, you know, I drafted this to suit myself, and, you know, Mary Lee didn't take that part out, so it survived this part.
I think there were some refinements added in this section.
She may have fiddled with it a little.
Well, more than fiddling. I mean, I think
True.
some of the refinements in the capital section are, I think, add value to the CIP process, and I think our analysis of this capital decisions and the capital model going forward. You know, this prioritization that Jeff is talking about and Jim is talking about, it should, at some level, be somewhat static. I mean, assets have their useful lives. Certainly emergencies pop up, like the Horseneck Sewer, but we don't want to see projects hopping around in different years in successive budgets, and we've seen that. And I don't know if that's urgency or if that's competing priorities or competing constituencies, but I personally would like to see a more static list that is grounded in objective criteria.
Well,
And that's what we're asking for here.
Yeah, that's right. If you had asked the department heads back 10, 15 years ago when they were first doing this, the first time it was they were tearing their hair out, and the second or third time they they were looking at much the same projects as they've been looking at in prior years, and they weren't spending a lot of time rescoring those projects because their point scores weren't changing. New projects were appearing from time to time, and sometimes people were lobbying to get those projects reviewed earlier in earlier years than they might instead of adding them when you knew there was room. People would make the argument that their project ought to get reviewed. Generally speaking, the department heads weren't very sympathetic to that. Generally speaking, they stuck with the projects and the scores they had, unless it's earlier somebody said there was an emergency, and said, here's room in year 4 or year 6 or year 7, and we can fit the new project into that time period. A couple of other things have happened to the capital plan. One of them is back 10, 11 years ago, we allocated a couple $100,000 to the Board of Ed to do a condition assessment of all of their major buildings and to come back with a detailed list of projects that needed to be done. Many of those projects have now been done, and we and the RTM allocated $400,000 to them in the fiscal 17 budget to do that again. And I don't know whether they're going to have that ready in time for this budget cycle or whether it will be the next one, though it's to their advantage to get the work done. We've always sort of paid a lot of attention to, when I say always since we had the CIP process, paid a lot of attention to the condition of the school buildings. Public Works tends to have a pretty organized process for looking at the condition of their infrastructure, and a lot of their infrastructure is underground, so it's particularly difficult to assess. And sometimes we get surprised by it, sometimes we catch the surprise in time, and sometimes we don't.
Right.
Parks and Rec tends to have projects that get scored more often down in the bottom of the scoring list because, yeah, you'd like to have a really nice new ball field, but if it's a nice new ball field or a leaky roof on a school, it's hard to compete with that. And one of the things that happened over the years was we adopted this scheme of allocating a lot of recurring projects into a large maintenance category that we stopped scoring. And I'm not sure what I think about that. I've been watching that since I got back, and it looks to me like there's an opportunity to reduce the size of routine maintenance and make some of those projects compete for their money again with the other projects that are going on. And that's one of the things that I hope we can all look at this year as we're evaluating the CIP list.
I'll just add, Jim and I visited with Commissioner Siebert at one point this summer, which was very helpful, with particular focus on sewers. And it goes to, Ms. Tarkington, your comment about $189 million of projects still outstanding, a big portion of which is from DPW and from sewers. And we were given a sheet that perhaps we should share at some point and had an explanation, and perhaps Amy can come as well, that really explained a lot of that, and the fact that a lot of it's sort of coming due soon and will be completed, as well as the fact that it's highly regulated, and as well as the fact that she stages and designs projects in phases based on the limits she perceives in funding and the way we finance capital projects. So there's a distortion going on that's self-imposed by what she is presenting to us. In addition to the fact that she's got a lot about to be completed in the next few years, which is very positive.
Well, I agree, but it's still $189 million of unspent money. And even in some cases, it's smaller amounts. I mean, we had a meeting earlier today on MISA because, MISA's completed and we have the TCOs, and now we're looking to how can we accomplish the C of O and do it quickly. And so, but when you look at it, even in the BOE, we need to begin to really wrap up these projects. The fact that we still don't have, Hamilton Avenue complete and Glenville School, and therefore we haven't done the audits yet, so therefore we can't get the, final amounts from the state. In my opinion, we need to sort of, hesitate a little bit. That's why, come back to quote, quote, whatever maintenance is or additional projects, if 25 is more than maintenance, and let's focus on getting these other things wrapped up so that we can begin to implement what you're talking about in terms of a 15-year plan, which I highly support. But we can't, in my opinion, start initiating too much until we begin wrapping up a number at $189 million in July that is just huge relative, some of the amounts are smaller, whatever. Otherwise, turn the money back to the town if the project is complete, but they're not doing that yet. And, off we go. But I certainly support maintaining our buildings. I think one of our problems is we're spending a lot of money on glorious new buildings, but we aren't necessarily setting up the kind of maintenance plan that we need to keep all of those buildings current. Nathaniel Witherall, when I was on that board, that was one of the critical things, was to set up a plan so that project would renew would then be followed with a regular plan. But instead, they took what was the reserves for depreciation, if we want to call it that, and then they decided that that was their annual money that they could have for all these other projects. We need a better discipline, which is what I think you're talking about, and I fully support that.
We used to have a requirement that capital projects that resulted in either new buildings or major changes to buildings produce as a deliverable at the end from the construction contractors a 15-year maintenance plan for the building, when the HVAC systems would come up and when the roof would come up. We're not getting those anymore, are we?
I don't recall that unless it precedes me.
Isn't that in the POCD also? There's supposed to be a plan for each building.
We do have it on the roll, and we had it. And we had it when we added the wing onto the library, but more than that, it was our policy 15 years ago. We need to get that back in place, because once that contractor is gone, if he didn't deliver that paperwork, we're not going to be able to recreate it. Lisa's a good example of that. It'll be very hard to keep track of all the things that need to be done, 5, 10, 15. Yeah, I have confidence in you, as long as you're never leaving. So that's probably something we need to try to reinstitute. The other point that's made in here that is we looked at while we're talking about sewers, we looked at the sewer budget, there's a peakiness coming in sewer maintenance as opposed to sewer capital. And we make the comment in here that that's probably not fundable with our current PAYGO system, in the sense that it will produce a very large mill rate increase on the half of the people who are or two-thirds of the people that are in the sewer system. I think we start getting $22 million a year of maintenance capex. So we need to look at how we're, that's a charter issue.
And there's two separate problems there. One is the question of whether or not we accurately and correctly categorize things as being improvement as opposed to maintenance, and vice versa. And then secondly, the arbitrary decision we make of how we fund each of those, because we obviously fund them differently, both from the standpoint of whether we bond and how we bond, and who in fact is writing the check, which taxpayers are writing the check.
Right. Some of that is at the discretion of the head of DPW, and some of it is constrained by the charter language.
Well, the charter, on the allocation between maintenance, I may be wrong about this, my recollection is that on the allocation between maintenance and improvement, that we're supposed to obtain the advice and recommendation of the head of public works on that. I don't think it necessarily requires that we mint it in that shape, but that's generally what we've been doing.
Yeah.
But I do think that we do need to look at it, Jim, and I do think that things like some of the, new trunk line systems that we're putting in, some of the new pump stations, that, if they ever get various and sundry approvals, will happen too. Those really, have a life. I mean, the current trunk lines have had a life of well over 100 years, or maybe 100 years. And so, saying that they're maintenance, to me, just doesn't reflect the longevity of this capital investment. And I think that, quite frankly, when I read the charter on some of this, I think there's a little bit more flexibility on these very long-term items, and we should consider it. And,
Flexibility to bond.
putting them into
Maintenance.
improvement.
Oh.
Well, no, I mean,
Gotcha.
maintenance, no.
Gotcha.
I think maintenance should be maintenance, and there are shorter life projects in the sewer department. But there are that gathering pipe that we did, it was all gathered. It was just going to the sewer plant. And that to me was truly a sewer plant
Right, well,
improvement.
you're in a different way making that point, and I think it is something we need to review. Leslie?
Yeah, I want to move the conversation back to just observations and general guidelines on observations on the overall guidelines. So going back to operating a little bit, because I think it's a different position than Leslie does on how to look at operating. I'm interested, and I think these budget guidelines would do it, is in level services, and then understanding where we have flexibility or new opportunities around level services. So I don't want to impose an artificial reduction in the 100s line, because we know where our contract settlements are, and to relate it to CPI, it's just not reality. That's not where we're able to settle these contracts. We're not in control of those settlements.
No,
However,
that'll
the
produce
overall-
headcount cuts.
Right.
That's.
That's the only way.
Right.
So the only, so I looked at the 2% overall on operating costs, which average or have a blended average of the GWI and the other numbers. And when you look at the historical actuals, so I went back and looked at the actuals for 16 and then looked at the average annual growth rates that it would take to get to a 2% overall. And in general, it's achievable. So that, again, we can't budget to what we think actuals are going to be in a municipal setting, because we don't have the flexibility of raising everybody's budget if they're off by $100 on June 15th. You don't have the tax revenue necessarily, nor the systems to be able to do that. But I think we're closer than we think in trying to be able to maintain level services and still come within a cost structure that we can work with. And bringing it, the focus on the guidelines, that it's the overall town and Board of Ed structure to 2% as opposed to individual departments is an important distinction that gives the first selectman and the superintendent the ability to identify where opportunities and needs are. And I think that we need to give them that flexibility. I don't think the BET should or is able to dictate where those things are done. Maybe we need to be somehow, if we can be collaborative or more helpful in identifying where opportunities are to increase efficiency and be more effective. That's great, but we're not close enough to the operations. It's not our role, and we tend to stumble and make enemies when we go too far into that. So I think the justification of new initiatives is important, because it's not always just a good idea up front. There's usually commitments going down the road that we need to understand. So again, that language about having a good conversation over what we really need to do in departments, both as time moves on, as the health department moves on, not to pick on the health department, but Nancy and I were commenting about the flu vaccine, which is a nice service we provide, but now every pharmacy in town provides it too. So, we have to change what we provide or look at what we provide as other opportunities and alternatives present themselves. So I thought that this was blended. There are sections of the guidelines that's drafted that I take exception to, and I don't think it will produce the outcomes we want for those February meetings, but there's opportunities to move that.
So if there are language or construction issues that you have in mind, you should, as I'm sure you will, share those with us soon, because we'll be playing this back and forth probably starting after the DEP meeting next week.
I'll just interject, there is language new this year about departments giving particular focus to actuals. Actuals for the 16 that just ended, actuals so far in 17 that we haven't seen previously, and we just hope there's going to be a little more focus on that and discussion about that in February.
We'll have 6 months worth at that point. Anyway,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, I'm going to recognize Nancy, but I just want to make the point that Jeffrey is a little concerned about, and maybe correctly. This Exhibit 1, this spreadsheet, with 2.5% in salary and 2% overall, maybe, we can argue about whether those numbers are right, but that structure still leaves us over $8.5 million away from being able to balance the budget with a 2.75% mill rate increase. So one of two things, well, there are at least two things which could happen. One of them is we could figure out how to operate and narrow that number. And the other is we could get to that number by reducing headcount substantially. And I can't figure out that 9-person number that Roland gave you. It doesn't seem right to me, but Roland will be back.
Roland
We'll
comes
get a
back,
chance.
we'll,
That's right. We'll
Jim
find
and I are
out.
going to go visit with him, because, he felt I had said 10, I went through the whole thing myself earlier, and Roland came up and said, no, it's 9. And so, there were a couple of things that we've talked about in the numbers, and we're going to have Roland just, I asked, again, same pension fund, same, not reducing any of those costs or health benefits, even though
If
you
he's
had-
watching Channel
But
79, he won't be
but
back.
But 9 isn't very many people.
But we also know that other assumptions within this spreadsheet changes. Usually at this time of year, I think we were closer to
That was my other
mill
way.
rate last year, but, in previous years, the 11 million, we were higher than 11 million.
Oh, sure.
on
Right.
that target.
Yep.
Right, and I've said there are two ways.
Okay.
The third, there are other ways, but that's
At
one of the
least
two
two.
ways, for sure. Nancy?
I was going to say, in the 8.6 million gap, actually, I might argue that we should perhaps, we're being overly optimistic on the state revenue side. I think if I'm right, in fiscal 18, we still have $2.5 million of assumed funds from the state, which I think 0.7 million is Fed money, 1.4 million is ECS, and 400,000 sales tax. Given, the state's finances combined with the recent court ruling, I personally think we'd be prudent not to approve any of that money. So
Right, and that would push this number to 11 or 12 million.
8.6 million goes up to, 11.1 million.
Yeah.
And then as I look at sort of where that's assuming we want to get to a 2.75% increase in the mill rate, which is where we have been, but, you could argue, given this, Leslie has made the point with inflation at 1% and what we've heard from, some of the constituents in town, to go at a 1.75% premium over inflation is perhaps too much in this economic environment. So I'm not necessarily at the 2.75% increase at this point. I really applaud the effort that was put into the draft in terms of encouraging departments to come with cost savings. I thought that was, something I don't think we've seen in the past, and I thought it was good.
Yeah, no, with all due respect, it's been there. I can give you reams of.
Okay, but not as explicit. In terms of, I'm not saying, I think it was very explicit in terms of what they're asking. One suggestion I might make in that front, though, is, to maybe even make it more explicit and say, asking for a multi-year, not just sort of what can we do now, but, invest, like ADP was a good example, invest in technology, and you can see a multi-year improvement in terms of controls, efficiency, and cost savings. So asking for departments to come with that perspective as well. In terms terms of the capital plan, we were just talking about it, we were talking about the Board of Ed having hired an outside consultant. If you were saying, Jimmy, I think DPW does a good job, I was just putting on the table. Should we as a town also hire an outside consultant to sort of look holistically? I mean, we have instances, the fire, Central Fire, where, you know, that really suffered from lack of maintenance over time, but we still would have had to replace it, I don't know. In terms of,
Nancy, you talking about then just capital, on that last post, capital, or you talking about having somebody go and look at operating too?
looking at the town's capital infrastructure and saying what the Board of Ed has just hired a consultant to look and say, you know, come to us with an independent assessment. Should we hire, you know, a URS or something and say, look at our infrastructure? I guess you'd have to exclude, as you said, sewers because, you know, they're underground. Maybe that's just for specialized, but.
Well, they
have a way of testing that.
Yeah, and
Right.
they do, and this doesn't take away from your point, but Al Manelli has a condition scoring system for all the town buildings, which he doesn't talk about very much, but in fact exists. And I think, Peter, correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think Al keeps that up.
It does, and I think there's a document he produced recently that just looks at what's been addressed since 2001 when they first began the capital improvement program in terms of buildings improved, replaced, renovated, and eliminated.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be good to see that maybe at the budget
Yeah.
committee at some
Yeah.
point. The school lunch fund, I know I've talked about this in the past, but I would still encourage the DPT to go back and look at that and ask the Board of Ed to come back to us with an outsourcing option. You know, as we look back at the good work that John Blankley and his committee did, you know, we know from that research that Stanford, Fairfield, Wilton, Westport, and Weston all outsourced. If we look at that study, it's clear that we could save ourselves some money vis-a-vis, I think, the $700,000 that we have as a general fund contribution. And then lastly, in looking at the final comments on page 5 of the draft guidelines, you know, there are comments to the effect that it implies that our current debt policy constrains our ability to maintain our infrastructure. You know, I would take issue with that comment. So that's just a little bit of an overview. I you know, very much appreciate the huge amount of work I know that you guys did over the summer, and these are a few of my thoughts.
When it comes to negotiating state level, as I shall be doing next year, I shall suppress the knowledge that Greenwich is budgeting without an ECS comment.
You know, I think they're going to do what they're going to do, no matter what we put in our budget.
Yeah, Michael?
I think the guidelines, we're setting a little bit of a policy. I'll say this forget any of the issues. These guidelines are coming out before most of the labor, well, some of the labor contracts other than the teachers are going. But by the time they get to the RTM, I think the guidelines will be out. I think that's the timing. Peter Shearer, the labor team that's working on the teachers, had a meeting with the budget overview, or not the budget, labor contracts committee, and tried to say to them, said, look, here's what we anticipate getting, and yet, you know, you've got these budget overview committee guidelines of X, and the numbers just don't match. I think we're setting up, I think we need to set a real policy here, because from a revenue point of view, we're further in the hole. I mean, last night, John Blankley will tell you, we sat in a room with 125, 130 people, RTM members, that they've lost faith in any revenues from the state towards that construction project. They don't have the faith that we're going to get that number, which brings us back to the remaining amount that's presumed revenue that we may lose. So we've lost a couple, 3 million, and we may lose a couple more. We need to, the departments, I think, will understand that. Overcoming that is going to be a challenge. Normally this time of year, we start budgets 6 or 7 million is the number we're looking for to meet the old number of that 3% sort of targeted range. Now the targeted range is low, the number's bigger, the revenues are down. So the guidelines, we can talk about the issues, but there really has to, I mean, for not just this year, but for the next couple of years, there has to be some changes. There's just, we can talk level services all we want. If you're going to continue to lose revenue, reduce the rate of taxation, they both go to the same place. Something's gonna have to move. I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but we as the BET, we have to recognize that. And then third, recognize budget overview committee. I mean, there's just,
So I agree, Mike, and that's why I tried to take what we have, craft it, so we try to still deliver the services that people expect, but to rethink a little bit the cost structure, not taking a drastic step.
just to add to my point, Leslie, what that will do is it's sort of like a mop. What we've been doing since the economic meltdown is we've been wringing the mop. We've had every year a certain amount, call it a point in the budget, call it 1% of the budget unspent. We put that in fund balance, that's allowed us to build up to our fund balance policy, but we built up fund balance, gives us a little bit of room for the interims, and we've also increased the amount of fund balance we've used in the HVO rate calculation. What you're saying to do, I agree that's a step, but what I'm saying is the mop, I believe, is you just can't take a department with 3/4 of their expenses goes up 2.5% or 3% labor contract and expect them to only go up 1.5 or 2. It only works for so long.
Yeah, fire department.
Any department. It's only going to work so long. That's it.
Well, I think they're going to have to, I mean, we do have more and more people, I mean, really bringing in a lot of outside department heads, and they are excellent. And quite frankly, let's let them perform. I mean, I think we've been spending too much time, us giving them feedback and cutting their budgets and doing this and that. I mean, let's see what they can do and come to us first. And then also the cost-saving things and the other things, I think that's great. But I think we need to push on them more on the front, just the same way they do on me in the private sector.
Well, the guideline as draft says, here's kind of here's the amount of money we forecast to increase last year. And if we follow that pattern, we have to find, forgetting that the state may pull another $3 million from us for a second, we need to find $8-9 million. Maybe it's 10, 11, 12 million, but let's just say it's 8 or 9, because 12 is a very difficult number to get to. Let's suppose it's 8 or 9. The guideline as drafted says, come up with projects that have cost savings that close that gap. And it says basically the school superintendent and the first selectman and their deputies figure out where to find that money and identify those as cost savings projects. The guideline's not supposed to be saying, though maybe it can be read this way, it's not supposed to be saying, you go ahead and budget for all this stuff and we'll figure out how to save that $8 million. It's supposed to be saying, if you budget this, you end up needing to find $8 or $9 million. Find the $8 or $9 million between schools and town operations. Now, Nancy's point, I think it was Nancy, was we always look kind of like this at this point in the process, and somehow by the time we get to making a decision in March, we've closed that gap without having a lot of headcount reductions. But I don't know whether I think that's going to happen here. I wouldn't want to count on it. But it's not, what we're trying to say with this guideline draft, and maybe it isn't working, we want the department heads, the first selectman, and the school superintendent to close that gap with cost savings projects. I think the difficulty is, and I think this is just a different way of saying what you said, Michael, you can't just ring them up a little bit more and save $8, $9, $10 million. You want to save $8, $9, $10 million, you have to reduce headcount, and it's not going to be 9 people. It's going to be a much bigger number than that. And if you reduce headcount by that much, you're reducing services. So the problem that the town faces, every town faces this, is 70–80% of its budget is people and their fringe benefits. And if you want to cut services, you have to cut people. And when you cut people, chunks of service disappear in a way they don't disappear in some other kinds of businesses. We don't have two-person police cars in Greenwich, which is what you have in big cities. We have one-person cars. So if you get rid of 3 police officers, that's 3 cars you're not going to field. And a police car 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is, depending on how you do the math, 6 or 7 officers. So you could get rid of 1 police car 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and get rid of 6 or 7 people. You could reduce the number of snow plows you field in a storm. And you just tell people, you know, we're not going to put all those trucks out because we don't have people for them, or we aren't going to pay the overtime for the extra people. And you're just going to have to wait longer for your snow to be plowed. In the school system, yes, there are a lot of non-classroom certified personnel in the school budget, but when you start cutting 50 of them, you're changing the number of students in a class. There's no way around that. So it's pretty hard to just solve that problem by being more efficient. The thing that I'm worried about is I don't think that necessarily the BET's job is to react to the public's or the RTM's desire to have smaller tax increases. I think to some extent the BET's job is to provide leadership in the town and to tell the town what we think really needs to be spent in order to provide services that we think they have to have, not just wish they had or don't care if we had. And that could put us in conflict with the RTM. And the point that I made years ago about the RTM is there's no way to unelect an RTM. You know, if you don't like the way they're voting and they're your representative, the only way to get rid of them is if there are 20 of them in your district, you have to replace all 20. Because you can't run somebody against Tom Byrne. You can't run somebody against any one member of the RTM. You have to run 20 people against everybody in that district and lift the whole bunch out. Because if you don't, the 2 people you're trying to get rid of probably will survive. That's a structural problem. So the BT is going to have to decide what leadership it's going to provide here. Now, what we believe is we just have too many services and we should spend less money and lower taxes. Then we can reflect that in the guideline, and we can reflect that in the budget that we finally approve. If we don't believe that, then we're going to have to get busy and persuade people that we're right and the Budget Overview Committee is not fully informed about what it costs to run the town.
That was my point about what the guidelines say goes into the labor contract negotiation, because I'll go directly to Leslie. I know, Leslie, you don't want to, you believe people want mobile services. I believe that's what you want. But we have to get that belief into the people who disagree with it. And that's why I think, as rough as it may sound, the guidelines have to show the alternative. Because the RTM vote that night, although 40 weren't voting, it was a six people spread, right?
Okay.
So you're dealing with 90 and 90, some number there.
92,
There's
98.
people in that voting group that voted to do wholesale change, wholesale reductions of the budget. They need to hear from the other people, okay, if they continue to take your lead, this is what happens, and I don't want that.
Right, and that means that the schools and the first selectman's office are going to have to be clear about what gets cut if budgets get cut, which is why the guideline says lay out the cost savings project.
There's a little bit of the difference on the numbers that I was trying to approach with you, Jim, because if you, I'll go back to one of your examples. If you go back to police and say come in at a 2% increase, and police accommodates that by deleting one car, the 6 or 7 people that you're speaking about, it may not be obvious or evident to you. It was just simply they put forward a budget with a staffing program with a few less faces on it. And unless you're really clawing through it and getting down into the weeds to understand, you may not realize the cut. If in fact, instead, you put forward as your Exhibit 1, the level services budget and then relied on the language more heavily that appears on page 3, where you say every department is to come forward and show us where cuts can be made, so that you then sit down with the police department in a relatively aggressive way and say, now you've come forward with a budget that's increasing by 2.5%. Show me what cuts you would make. This is your dialogue in February. Show me what cuts you would make to delete 0.5% of that. Okay, I don't want to do that. Show me another. Yep, let's do that. Show me another, et cetera, and to actually have that dialogue. There are those who would argue, it might be John Blankley among them, and that is that, no, now we're micromanaging. Now we're beginning to tell the police department how to run a police department, whereas what you ought to be doing instead, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but it might be what you would be saying. What you should be saying instead is, no, let's do it Jim's way. Come in at a 2% budget, you take the cuts, you're the professional, we just want the 2% at the bottom line. I favor the approach, not John's approach, but the approach of, no, talk to me about what the cuts were, and I'll tell you which ones we will endorse and which ones we won't, and have that be a February conversation, but not do that with a demand for a 2% bottom line operating now. I'm afraid there, I'm going to get departments that I can take every service that they hate providing, and they'll cut those, and I won't really get a chance to have say to really understand what did you cut.
But see, I think that, again, we're taking on the operating responsibility for the town. I think we are the chief financial officers of the town, and Peter Tessie and Laura Erickson are the CEOs of their businesses. And I think the approach that you're talking about, that's why my approach, I could be more dramatic under Mike's, but I thought that, a good transition, do this year, do something else the next year. But I'm looking to Peter Tessie, I'm looking to Laura Erickson to figure out within their businesses, where can we rebalance things? Maybe it isn't all out of the police department. Maybe it isn't all out of the fire department, but maybe it's other departments this year. I mean, we put a tremendous amount of money into Parks and Rec after Superstorm Sandy. Nearly all of our insurance money and other was really to upgrade and take, things for like the next 20 years because they were destroyed by Superstorm Sandy. So this was a little bit different than what you were talking about, Parks and Rec before. But maybe this is the off year for some, XYZ department. But I think this is, we are very fortunate. We have a Peter Tessie who's been in office now for, quite a few years, many years. What? 9 years.
But who's counting?
Right, and he knows where there are opportunities. And the same thing, Laura's been around. And so, I just think that, I've always been given guidelines, this is where, and then when I come in, it's like, okay, now take another 10% out of your budget, or now it isn't so funny. That's the reality of the real world.
I didn't want to work for that company.
And that's the reality of the real world, and that's what our colleagues are seeing. On Saturday night, I was having dinner with another couple, and he's a lawyer in Manhattan with his own law firm, made, good-sized firm, and he was talking about their healthcare costs and how much their employees were picking up of the cost, 50%. A new lawyer, 29 years old, shocked at what her healthcare costs were going to be, et cetera, et cetera. But when I went back and sort of recalculated some of Roland's numbers, and I see our benefits basically increase our labor costs by 50%. That's very high in today's environment. So, what can we do differently? But I think this falls less on us to select after they come up with these projects and more, but with lots of support. I don't mean to, to Peter and Laura to help us out on where we can still offer the services and quality, but absorb some of the costs differently.
Well, so I have a lot of confidence in Peter. I feel badly for Laura because she doesn't have a school superintendent at the moment, but she's going to be busy.
Interim.
I think that this conversation focuses on exactly the thing we're going to have to resolve in the next 5 weeks. We have to decide how we want Exhibit 1 to look and what we say to people about what Exhibit 1 means when they get it. You said it in your way, you've said it another way. To be candid, it was easy for the two of us to say, well, let's just put it down the way it was last year and see where that leads us. Because it promoted exactly the conversation I thought it would probably promote, and I think you did too. This is the real issue, and I think the thing speaking for myself, I want to be careful about is I want to make sure that I'm promoting a Greenwich, Connecticut that I still want to live in. I can imagine a budget which would make some people very happy, and it wouldn't be very hard for me to draw it out on a piece of paper. But it wouldn't be a Greenwich, Connecticut I would want to continue to live in. It wouldn't have the schools running the way we want them running, and I don't want to wait forever to get my streets plowed when there's a snowstorm. And, I don't want to wait forever to get a policeman or an ambulance when I need one. And I'm speaking just for myself, those are hard judgments. They're not right or wrong answers, but I want to be careful that I don't get chased into budget cutting activities because some people think that's a good idea.
That's the vision I could certainly use.
We'll talk about the two-man fire crew another time.
Well, we have some extra firefighters in Glenville. We can move some of them around, right? Because apparently we don't care what happens to those of us who live in the Northwest. Anyway.
Jim, if I might, I just
Sure.
wanted to, express, I fully appreciate the work that the BET does, having served on it 10 years. I think it's only become increasingly harder. We all know that. I do think, though, the guidelines become this holy grail that I hear people spending a lot of time worrying about, looking to try to figure out what every little word means. And I think whatever the outcome of it is, and I think it's a good document, so I think as long as there's clarity to the main points, and I sense there's a lot of, more so than maybe professed in the comments here. Frankly, I could see something to agree with in everyone's comment. I think from the department's perspective, and I said this in our caucus, and I'll say it to the fuller group, I think sometimes the mildest tone can produce the wrong effect. And you may not realize that that tone is doing that, but it does. And I think as you try to crystallize this, keep that in mind, because by and large, I think you all know, as I know, that we have a relatively effective group of people working on the schools in the town. I mean, there's always room for improvement. I support the ideas for innovation, but they also are finite. I mean, there are a finite number of things people can do in a prescribed period of time due to numerous factors, some regulatory, some legal. So I think it's important because I think you'll wind up getting the outcomes you want if you just measure the tone a little bit. Two, I think in terms of, Leslie, your comments, I appreciate your
delineation of authorities. It's one of my challenges because I do think in this system, the frustration is, whether it's me or Jim, when it was you and I was in your chair, I think I stepped on your toes a couple of times. I think everybody has an opinion, but I think those opinions need to be in the context of what their role is. And I try very hard not to step on other people's, knowing the impact it has in the relationship. So I think we've been through it, and Nancy, you were chairman when we did the reduction in force. You were very collaborative and helpful. I've worked with Leslie, also very collaborative and helpful. I think as long as our directive is clear, I mean, we're going to manage from the finances what your expectation is to the best of our ability. We've done it before. I think our track record is really good. I do think, though, again, Mike said it, I think several of you, all of you on the committee said it, we're at the point where we really wrung as much as we can out of the existing structure, so that unless there's going to be wholesale changes to, reorganizations, really we're talking about reducing headcount. And when I think about the sphere that I'm involved with, and I think of it in terms of external services and internal services, the bodies to me are really in the external service providers, the police, the fire, the public works and parks. You're not going to get a whole lot, although we talk about it, and we'll get changes in the law, the land use, HR already did it with HRIS and you folks who are involved in it. I think you're going to be happy over time with that. But that's where the bulk of the bodies are. And I will say, I think I could say with confidence, in certainty and authority that, particularly in public works and in Parks and Rec, further reductions will result in service diminution. It just has to, because they're stretched now. I think the conversation about police is a good one, and I find myself amazed that I'm actually saying it, that I would welcome it. And it's going to require a lot of analysis. And I think, Jim, you bring that expertise, and all of you have been involved with it. But I think clearly we gave the police and fire a pass in 2009. I don't know if we're necessarily in the position to do so again, in looking at how they deliver the service and perhaps paring back. Because I think your term is not with this, but say they're richly funded. They're a well-funded police department. So I'll close with that. I will say, because I think I've talked to most of the people on the BET, and it's no secret, but that as we look at the police department and the after effects of the most recent high-profile case, we are going to go forward with an outside organizational assessment. The new development is, and it's one I'm going to give clear credit to Ben, because I sat and talked with him. He says, Peter, you got to do an RFP. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, it makes sense. An RFP in the sense of have a fully transparent process that outlines the scope of what we're looking to have done from a reputable sources, and then select, like we would do with anything else, and then use that as a foundation, not just to deal with our, call it cultural issues or organizational issues, but from a resource deployment, if we could. Now, I may be asking for apple pie and butter, but my point is, it's an opportunity. We're taking something that was not pleasant and trying to learn from it. So that's in process. I will say that, frankly, we don't know where we're going to get the money for it. So I guess I'm saying to my friends, hopefully you will think about this and we'll have more conversations. We'll look first for existing resources. We weren't as favorable persuading you to give us money for the fire department from your funds that Pete has, but perhaps you'll all be much more enamored with giving it to the police because it's assessment. So, but very important. And finally, because all the people have been consulted, all of the unions on board, the chief is on board, and some of the other key people I've talked to, I think, recognize it's time to take a look. So that could manifest itself in improvements, maybe not in 17-18, but in 18-19 as we look at the police department, how it's constructed. Because really we're dealing with an historical organization where it's always been promoted from within. And that in itself may be having multiple factors, not just the culture, but in how we look at things. So I think we all can, say we all have to agree on everything, but I sense a lot of receptiveness to this. And again, let's remove the personalities and the positions. We'll just look at the structure. And it's time to look at it. So we'll do our best. We will, we'll do our best. But the other thing, the survey is going to be done of residents over the course of the month of October. So hopefully we'll have some additional data that we all can use to validate our point to other decision makers. Again, I think, why do people react the way they do in terms of the budget? And this is my sense, is that they feel aggrieved. So the people who voted at Copfield, well, you know what, we're tired. We're tired of losing more money from the state. We're tired of the town raising the taxes 2 3/4. They obviously, to me, there was a anger about it. And I guess it's trying to understand why are you so angry about it? We live in one of the most premier communities in the country. You've got some of the best services. What is it that you don't like? So I'm thinking the survey is in one scientific way, but I think to your point, you've all been going to the meetings. That's sort of the way I'm trying to see. What are you saying?
Peter, this is a community-wide survey similar to what you've done previously with UConn or whoever you're going to choose this time.
Castleton College.
Okay.
Okay. They're doing it. So I believe it's the end of October. And I think we did incorporate a question as to that value.
As to what?
As to, I don't have the exact question, but do you think you're getting a good value for your tax? If you had to reduce services, we were trying to do it in a way that would work with the time period. Because they're already going to ask the same questions they asked last time to see if in fact there's been change. I don't know. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I think it's mid to late October. Administered. I believe we have the results somewhere around December. So we should have the, yeah.
All right. We have one last item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the
I
prior
would
meeting.
move the approval of the minutes.
Well, I'll second that, but I'd like to request a change. When there's a sentence that's been added to the minutes, which brought my name. So I'd like, if possible, on the first page, under new business, the thing on Mr. Klein, on the sentence that said, Mr. Klein emphasized that to successfully implement, just start like the clause, in response to Mrs. Tarkington's question, Mr. Klein emphasized that to successfully implement. It was originally in the changes or something similar to that I sent out, and it's missing. My name is missing. Your name is there, Mary Lee, Jim's name is there, but my name is missing from my comments.
Well, do I get my name put in there too somewhere?
Did you have it?
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I just, sorry.
Is that okay, Mary Lee?
Yeah.
Okay, so with that change,
I so move.
Second?
in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Give that to her so she gets it in the right place.
And I move adjournment.